I tell you, I just can't seem to get away from these square bodies. This is a 1985 Silverado. It is painted in Porsche Yacht Blue Metallic. It was, as it stated, a nut and bolt restoration frame up. Interesting choices were made on it as far as I'm concerned. It does have the one-piece glass, these little mirrors that you can't see anything out of. But manual windows, I found that interesting. Oh yeah, even the buzzer works. And so does like the seat belt light. So original gauge pack, which you don't see this very often, especially with a tachometer, which is pretty cool. 96,000 showing on the clock right now. Truck is about as, not sorry about that glare. The truck's about as nice as they get, to be honest with you. It is fantastic. Even has the little package tray still behind the seat. The paint job is as close to a 10 as you can get as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I know I could go fine tooth it and find little issues here and there, but for something you would ever drive on the street, I'd give it a 10. Nice bed liner. And all the trim is on this truck. Show you under the hood, and he is getting different wheels and tires. So, oh, somebody fingerprinted it. That was not me. So according to the paperwork, this is a GM crate engine, I think like a 350 horse. And it does have, you see the fuel system down here, which is that Vitec ice cold air with a Sandin compressor. It doesn't run like a fancy front runner bracket. It's just, looks like they're painted aluminum. It does have the aluminum pulleys. It's pretty neat. And you know I love this mechanical fan. Probably one of the nicest square bodies that you'll find that was not just a full custom build. It was like custom back to factory. So what we're gonna do is put a 5.7 Belltech lowering kit on it. We have the shocks and the shackles here right now. I think the rest of the parts are supposed to be here today. So we're gonna get started and get this thing up on jack stands and get prepared to make it look like it should. Now that we've got it safely supported, this is fine for normal maintenance. I needed to add that additional jack stand under the engine cradle area, because when you go to remove the weight of this rear end and leaf springs and stuff, which is extremely heavy, you have a tendency to
tip over and capsize.
And nobody wants that. It's great that this truck has been recently assembled, or at least appears to be. Shouldn't have any trouble with the hardware being removed. And the good news is these bolts are already gonna come out the right direction. I can go ahead and unbolt this axle and drop it to the ground and remove the shocks while we wait for the flip kit, because all this has to come off to achieve that anyway. So I removed the nuts from all of the U-bolts and took the shocks out so that rear axle can fall. Well, I say as far as it wants to, but you're gonna be limited by the brake line and that vent, which the vent's easy enough to take care of, but the brake line is connected to hard lines on each end. So I put these blocks here, and I'm hoping we don't run into a lack of hose before it makes contact there. Oh, it looks like it just barely came out of those. Let's see if that's gonna be too short. Well, that's all that brake line wants, and it is not making contact. Maybe put a 2x4 on top of each of these. That worked out just right. Some people may just go ahead and pull the whole thing out, but you gotta deal with the brake lines leaking nonstop or rebleeding. You're gonna have to take the parking cable off, which is not awesome to do. I mean, the drive shaft is the most simple part of removing this axle. Now we can take these leaf spring packs all the way out. A little bit interesting. This is the shackles that were on this truck when it came in, which apparently had a 2-inch lowering kit already, or maybe a 2.4. I kind of doubt it. 1/2-inch difference between the Belltech for the 5.7 kit and whatever that part number equates to. The rear's all ready and waiting for parts. I did go ahead and hang that new shackle on that leaf spring kit. So the next thing we can do while we're waiting for apparently just spindles, because I guess this already has 2-inch drop coils, get this front end tore apart, which the first thing I'll do is take off the caliper, and then I'll zip tie it back here on this upper control arm with like a real heavy HVAC zip tie. Remove the rotor hub assembly and set it over here in this box. Remove this tie rod, steering tie rod in, which they all have castle nuts. Then there's this one up here at the top, and here's down at the bottom. These can get tricky to do if you don't have like a ball joint fork. Sometimes you can just use a floor jack and kind of get creative about how you support things and bust them loose. The main thing is don't tear up the threads on any of those ball joints. Went off pretty smooth. I kind of expected to, because it didn't look like this has been put together for all that too very long. Plus having the right tools to do a job, like the right hammer to hit right there. So you can see I just go ahead and put those castle nuts back where they belong for now. And I guess I didn't show you guys earlier, just took the 2 bolts off that hold the shock. Actually, this upper mount just kind of lives there like that. Anyway, I wanted to show you something on this caliper. Someone has had to clearance the heck out of that thing, it looks like. And then they just put some, I don't know, black paint on it, I guess, to sort of make it look okay. But I'm assuming they put way too small of wheels to run that caliper. All the parts are here now. We'll look at this later in the video. Spindles are the Belltech 3100, which are advertised as a 3-inch drop. I actually measure them to be 3 3/4 of an inch from here to here. And these are 1 inch. So basically a 2 3/4 inch distance between these should, I guess, likely equate to a 3-inch total drop. Couple things you'll notice, looks like they've clocked the brake caliper a little bit further, like towards 3. This one sits up a little more like 2 o'clock. You can see also where your tie rod end goes. They have this angled down so it doesn't mess up that steering geometry. But yeah, this will still sit on there. It'll just be rotated to give clearance where the caliper is. This side's complete. That shock actually fought me a little bit. I ended up taking the top off to try to help align the bottom, because those ears just weren't where they needed to be to get that bolt started, and then put it on the top and snug that sucker down. I just realized I'm a little concerned now, since this caliper had to be toleranced. You know, a lot of times when you do these lowering spindles, because of this is now much further outside of the diameter of your rotor itself, meaning the lower control arm, that it can make contact on wheels that don't have a lot of clearance, like running these 15s. Oh, nope. That is a problem. I mean, I could put spacers on it just to get it to clear for now and drive it, just so we don't require him to bring us new wheels. Now we can move on to this flip kit, which the part number for this one is 6850 for the 73 to 87, aka Squarebodies. Get the instructions, couple of stickers. This is our template that we're gonna have to cut out and make this hole, because that's a reference hole we'll show you on the frame. Comes with, of course, both C-notches, some bump stops that will go in here. You got some heavy hardware that go through the sides, and then a little smaller hardware that goes one each on the bottom. And I think we may plug weld some of this stuff, just because I kind of like having some weld on there instead of just bolts. But I noticed these are all the crush lock nuts where it's pinched on the top side, so it won't ever back off of these bolts. So I'm sure that's probably fine. We may just go with that because they kind of seem to know what they're doing. I don't hear anybody complaining. These are the brackets that will be located on the bottom side of the axle. And one of the things to point out, the offset holes here, because these are new plates, U-bolts, and these nuts are nylock nuts, so they're not going to back off, and they have washers as well. So when we cut this off, it's probably easier to show you on the passenger side, because it's difficult once we get in here working to try to watch this on video. You can see where this bolt, which there's a brake line bracket on the inside of the frame, that needs to line up with this hole designated as A. But if you notice, that will set the opening pretty far back, further than it is right here with this bump stop. So the expectation is, like, if you drew a radius from the transmission and you bring this axle higher and higher up, it's going to go further back than it will be at this droop. So they are planning for it. Also, if you notice on these offsets for the center bolt of the leaf spring, are technically going to relocate the axle further back on the leaf spring pack than it is from the factory, which is dead center. And before you start doing a bunch of cutting, you'll notice I've got jack stands supporting the rear of the frame and the front of the frame from this section. I put the front on jack stands on the A-arms, so we don't have to worry about any cantilever problems. You also want to make sure clear the wiring behind here, and you're going to get rid of this clip if you have it. Rarely do you at this point, but this truck again was very nicely restored. Also, the instructions will call for probably remove the bed, which would be a lot easier if you've got a bunch of buddies, but I sure don't want to mess with anything with this paint and alignment of this truck. So what I've done is loosen the bolts, just backed them off like 3/8, a half an inch, and then you can see there's clearance here for that C-notch to sit. But I'll put a wedge in here and raise it up a little higher just for better access. So the first step is to get the grinder out and cut the heads of those rivets off of the factory bump stops and remove those plates out of the way on both sides. I have to take the wiring loose on the driver's side, the brake line loose on the passenger side, and get that out of the way from the back side of the frame. Then lay our template on the frame rail, mark it with where the template says to, and wants us to drill 1/2-inch holes. Then get our grinder out and cut lines center to center between those holes that we cut. And we'll pinch the C-notch on top of the factory frame, use a transfer punch to mark center on those holes, and then drill those guys out, then bolt it in for permanence. Actually, I got so excited about progress, kind of forgot to film for you guys. So the C-notch is completely in there and bolted, rock solid. After you do that, tighten the bed bolts back and then remove these jack stands. I pulled the hardware out, it's right here. Start the leaf springs in the front after you've jacked the axle up pretty high. I'm gonna probably raise it up even a little bit higher. I've got those started. Then I'm going to, you can see they got this plate just sitting here. Then I'm gonna go ahead and just run the bolts in this bracket for the rear shackle, and those should be loose so you can kind of play with them. Ugh. I do not. So, I'm sorry, is it 8 o'clock or 8:30? I've said both times. Okay. If I ever get a chance to talk to somebody from Belltech, I'm gonna ask them who's in charge of measuring the U-bolts. We'll probably need to omit the lock washer because there's not enough room for it to fit right here when you reinstall the rear shock. And I don't think it's a good idea to put the bolt in beforehand and then put the nut on this end, because if you ever have to service this shock, you have to pull the entire leaf pack off. And again, with these lengths, you don't want to do that. All right, I put it up. I put the jack up until it just takes it off the jack stands, because that's ride height. And now I can tighten these up, which, by the way, someone's gonna need to make an appointment with their exhaust shop. Those are nice and tight now. Just need to let the jack down so I can fit these new wheels and tires on this bad boy. 20 by 8 US mags. I think these are chrome Bullits, 245 40/20s on the front. And on the rear, these are 22 by 10s. Wait, they might be 11s. I think they're 11s. 295 30 ZR22. Yeah, these are 22 by 11s. 7 inches is a game changer. But I mean, I feel like that's where you want it.
Oh, I love that right there. Oh, I almost need the front down another inch though.
Yeah, well, it needs to be driven a little. And
down about, what, 3/4 of an inch maybe?
Probably. Yeah, because you got to keep in mind, as of right now, the wheels are at full droop and then touch the concrete. They can't even slide out, right? Because the track needs to get wider for it to get lower, and it can't do that if it's not rolled yet. It's still holding itself up.
I think that did break it down a little bit.
Yeah. If we look from pinch welds, it's 9 1/8. That fender is about right, and that's 9 1/16.
So it's right on.
So technically, the truck is within a 1/16 of being level. That truck needed
Right, we need that pop.
full custom wheels, not old man torque thrust. And you know, a 20 or a 22-inch torque thrust is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But a 15-inch torque thrust, it's like when you order them, it comes with an AARP card. Here's the finished product. It did turn out looking great. This is exactly what that truck needed. Those torque thrust in 15s were just not going to get it done. It can be a little deceiving. The truck sits perfectly level. When you have 22s and 20s, well, you're going to get that look, especially since on these square bodies, well, most trucks, the rear wheel well sits much lower than the front does. Just naturally because of the factory rake that they have. Certainly was a transformation from a really slick old man's pickup truck to a pretty rad street truck now. Definitely does it justice. If you guys enjoyed this quick little content on doing that lowering kit with Belltech, the part numbers for everything we used on this truck will not be in the description below because, you know what, they're not paying me, but they could be.